Good evening, everyone. I'm Pallavi Ade. I am the co-founder of Asian Pathfinders, along with Shreyas Deshmukh. And we are really glad to bring you this edition of our dialogue series, which is on women and mental health. And we are tying up with Thea Care for this. So we have Swarnima from Thea Care, and she'll give you a brief about her work, but just about Asian Pathfinders. So we started last year as a knowledge sharing platform. Our aim is to bring practitioners, scholars, sorry, together for a constructive dialogue. So we do that through two different avenues. Our fireside chats, which are held every Saturday from 11 to 12 p.m., and the dialogues, which we are doing it today, which are alternate Thursdays from 5:30 to 7. So the aim is to have a multidisciplinary approach to different issues which are, I think, bothering most of us. But yeah, but this is an informal way to connect. We don't have very structured things. We just have our discussions. We request everyone to be on mute. So just to reduce the noise, we do record our sessions and we put them on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to share the sessions with others, please do use the link. Uh, about our upcoming sessions. So today's session and our upcoming sessions in March are part of our series that we are doing on Women History Month and on occasion of International Women's Day. So we are highlighting certain women-centric issues which we feel that is really important. So we are really glad, Swarnima and we have decided to come up with this topic. But yeah, this Saturday we are also tying up with Women for Politics, where we will be looking at topics related to women in Gram Panchayats. And we have two really eminent speakers who work on the ground. We have Madhu Joshi and Bhim Raskar. And we have Sugandha Parmar, who is from Women for Politics, who will be moderating this session. Uh, just the community guidelines, like I said, first is just please stay on mute. Another is if there is something which seems like a clash of intellectual property, please reach out to the speakers of that specific topic and ask for their permission. And again, the content that we post, we all come from different walks of life, so we have different views, and we understand that, but let's have a constructive dialogue. So do not post any defamatory content here. If you are, then unfortunately, we will have to bar you from this session and future sessions. Please don't make us do that. And obviously, do not post any promotional content without permission from the organizers. So just how do you get in touch with me and Shreyas? You can always email us or look up Asian Pathfinders on social media. So moving on to today's session, I know Swarnima is going to introduce the speakers, but I'll just introduce her. So Swarnima is the founder of Thea Care, a platform enabling the best health for women through nutritional and hormonal health. And she's also the curator of FemCon, India's first women health festival. She's an AstraZeneca Young Health Scholar and part of the Youth Advisory Board for Unilever's Self-Esteem Project, which focuses on adolescent body image. Thea Care has impacted the lives of 100,000 women and families since its inception by providing right-based healthcare services. Swarnima is widely published. And over to you, Swarnima.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Really glad to collaborate with you on this for this really important conversation. I'm a little under the weather, but I hope I'm loud enough for everyone to hear. A warm welcome to everyone who's attended and also to the speakers. I've been in touch with you over the last few days to really conceptualize and structure out this conversation. And what we're going to do is, before I introduce myself a little more and Thea Care, I think the aim here today is to really talk about the idea of mental health and women's health and how it is there is no women's health without mental health. Just like we say there is no health without mental health. And I think the main reason why we've come up with this topic is because when we think of mental health, a lot many times we think in terms of disease, we think in terms of illness or something like that. But here we are going to talk about today is the idea of culture and the idea of systemic factors that really affect the mental health of not just women but also men and other genders. So basically, our point of inquiry today is how, whether it is at home, in the workplace, while accessing healthcare, etc., mental health is extremely gendered. And we are going to be talking about the idea of culture, the idea of healthcare access, illnesses even, and also the idea of women beyond the domestic space, in the professional space and outside, and how these gender notions of how women should be, etc., how that really impacts their emotional and mental well-being. So we will be, this is just a trigger warning sort of, in place. We will be talking about suicides, postpartum depression, sexual violence and abuse. There is, we will be very sensitive, of course. We are working with eminent practitioners in the field of healthcare and mental health care. We will be extremely sensitive and right-spaced in our conversation, but please let us know if something is bothering you, and we will be, moderating our language accordingly. So just to give a small introduction about TheaCare, so my work and background has been in public health, and that has, taken me across, different parts of the country and, some other parts of the world. And I saw that, female healthcare was lacking, not just in terms of awareness, but awareness among people, but also when it came to awareness among practitioners and care providers. Because there is a huge gender gap in medical research itself, a lot of problems that women are facing, which are hormonal in nature, mental in nature, they are not able to get the right kind of care, because many a time the practitioners themselves don't know how to give the evidence-based integrated care. That is just not how our healthcare system is, and that is the gap that we're trying to bridge. So when people come with us with issues like PCOS, endometriosis, mental health issues, fertility problems and everything, menopause even, navigating menopause, what we try to provide is we try to provide an integrated care. So not just a gynecologist, but also other allied healthcare professionals who will, have a collaborative journey towards healthcare for women and their particular problems. And we are a very young organization. We are very new. We are constantly revisiting and re-examining our goals. And the core remains, bridging the gap in science and data and providing the right care to women, which is as updated as possible. So that's what we do. And hence the idea of mental health, plugging the various gaps in healthcare. So thank you so much once again for attending, and we hope this will be a very interactive conversation. Towards the end, for the 5 minutes after we've heard from all the speakers, we'd also love to, sort of have, 5 or 10 action items, like have something at the end where we're talking about, okay, what action can we take in this, in this matter, and what can we each do in our particular spheres, So without further ado, I would love to introduce Dr. Sabeen Kapasi. She's a gynecologist and a health policy and governance strategy lead. She has worked with several healthcare businesses and projects in public and private sector industries. Having studied data strategy from the Wharton School, HBS, and Stern NYU, she advises the governments of 11 states on health policy and the Office of the on health policy. And she was part of the initial team strategizing for the Gujarat CM elections earlier. She's a governance strategy lead and supply chain procurement head at MSF UN. And interestingly, she has been on the front lines for the last 13 months as part of the UN COVID-19 response team. And the last time I spoke to her, she said, I don't know, like what, 54 countries or something, if I'm not mistaken. So quite a roller coaster. So welcome, Sabeen. Sabeen will be addressing, precisely what we discussed, the absence of a mental health framework in female healthcare. So when women are coming for, things like vaginismus, vulvodynia, fertility health issues, hormonal health issues, or anything, most of the time, we don't see a mental health framework that is working alongside it, even though data shows that having mental health support actually increases healthcare outcomes. So this is the gap that, Sabeen, we would love for you to address a little bit. And we'd love to hear your opening remarks on this. So over to you.
Hi, Saima. Thank you for such an illustrious introduction. I would like to open with a bunch of facts to begin with. So, all of these are actually dated facts. They were published in 2001 by the WHO, but we don't have a lot of updated facts. So let me run with this. Depressive disorders account for close to 41.9% of the disability from neuropsychiatric disorders among women, compared to just 21% among men. Leading mental health problems for elderly are depression, organic brain syndromes, and dermatitis, a majority of which affect women, not men. An estimated 80% of 50 million people affected by violent conflicts, civil wars, disasters, and displacement are women. Lifetime prevalence rates of violence against women range from 16 to 50%. And at least 1 in 5 women suffer from rape or attempted rape in their lifetimes. I think these are really important facts to begin with, because we generally look at mental health in terms of care, but um, mental health is way more than that. Clinically, there are two main types, I suppose. One is the CMD, which is common mental disorders, right, which constitute over 80% of your general disorders, which are your anxiety disorders, your fear, your depression, unipolar depression, which is the second largest global burden of disability. And then there are severe mental illnesses like your schizophrenia, your severe mental disorders like your bipolar syndromes. Both of these affect women disproportionately and in a much larger way than it affects other genders, especially men. Because it's not just about mental health here, this is about everything that results in these problems, right? This is about the cultural shift, this is about the inherent biases that women suffer, which result in these problems being disproportionately affecting females. Now, coming back to the whole medical approach to it. So in a med school, we are always taught about medical disorders. Every doctor is taught psychiatry as part of their curriculum. But psychiatry in medical college basically results in treatment of your disorders which are non-CMDs, which are basically severe mental illnesses, which in a sense looks like a mental illness, right? And the approach to it is not in terms of care, but in terms of treatment, right? Now that basically breaks it down to biochemical effects of it, and thus serotonin, which is the most used chemical in treatment of mental disorders, is basically a chemical to balance out in chemistry, which is good in its own way. It's a really good solution, but we don't understand that we, as a medical science professional, do not really understand brain chemistry as good as we think we do. Now, this is a social bias coming into picture, because we also are brought up by the same society where women's health concerns are ignored, and those are the same teachers teaching us, and those are the same processes that we are taught. So we don't give a lot of account to women health problems like anxiety. For example, historically, hysteria had been linked to the uterus. In fact, hysterectomy is the word that came from hysteria, and that is removal of uterus, and that was considered as a solution for mental health illnesses in females. And those are illnesses as simple as your PMS or mood swings, or even heightened sexual drive in some cases. And uh, going to the other side of the spectrum, we also have problems like FGM, which plague only women, and that is a extremely cultural problem, right? Which is not inherently a problem, but it is an induced syndrome, right? Now, coming back to my core competency, which is reproductive health. So, females, obviously, in every country in the world, are affected quite a bit more by reproductive health problems than men. In fact, 80% of reproductive health issues, be it prepartum, which are your fertility issues, or even your pregnancy issues, and your postpartum problems, which affect almost 80% of new women, are basically problems that are brushed aside by a normal doctor saying stating stress or stating problems of hormonal imbalance or hormonal recession in this case. But the mental health support or mental health approach to this is fairly negligent. Apart from that, the approach that we do take to mental health, as I said, was treatment based, is drug based, and is not therapeutic. Now, um, it's always difficult to assess the outcomes of therapeutic mental health approach, right? Because the markers that we have of success are very clinical, are very biochemical. So it's never really easy to understand whether mental health intervention works or not. But in my practice, both in conflict regions with women who have faced severe violence, sexual and otherwise in life, as well as women who are my patients in fertility practice, I have seen mental health approach actually working out much better than just clinical medication. So I believe that there's a huge gap to be bridged over here, especially in biases of healthcare workers. And I think that is where we should start from.
Thank you so much, Sabina. I think that was something so important, especially the data that you shared, and also the perspective, the perspective from where mental health, healthcare practitioners are coming. What is very interesting is that, like you rightly said, that when we're talking, one is a treatment-based approach and the other is a therapeutic approach. And I think the challenge is how to bridge the two, how to bring the two together. And it requires a fair amount of unlearning from the perspective of the patient as well as the medical practitioner to do this, because we've often seen that, if I may say so, female health is very essentialized to reproductive well-being. And
this is breaking up.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I audible? Please let me know.
Yes.
Audible now. Yeah.
Right. Should I repeat any part of what I said?
What's the last statement?
Yeah. So I was saying that, the challenge is that, how do we really bridge the two? And to do that, there is a fair amount of unlearning that is required, not just from healthcare practitioners, but also from patients. Because, if I may put it this way, a lot of female health is sort of reduced to or essentialized as reproductive well-being. In many cases, like, when in our platform, for instance, we ask women to choose their healthcare goals so that we can help them accordingly. And an overwhelming majority, young women in their 20s and early 30s, mid 20s, they will choose fertility, with even before getting married and things like that. The first fear is fertility. And that's very telling, because it is not a liberty that everyone enjoys to make these choices away from the traditional pale. And there is a thing called health related quality of life, which is a patented sort of intervention to measure precisely these things. So endometriosis and how it affects HRQOL, health related quality of life. Similarly with PCOS and so many others. And it's a fairly new intervention, but I think as each of us, as healthcare advocates in different ways, I think our work has to be to make HRQOL, your health related quality of life, as integrated with treatment as possible. And there is so much evidence now that exists that an HRQOL approach is actually giving better outcomes, like you very rightly said. So thank you for that.
Before we skip, I would like to mention, because you mentioned fertility, I would like to mention this example of a patient of mine, 33-year-old patient, 5 years. This is the story that happened 5 years ago. She called me at 3:30 p.m. She had tried IVF around 2 times and failed, which is common because the fertility success rate is somewhere around 45%, even in the best cases, right? So she called me at 3 p.m. in the middle of the night, stating suicidal thoughts, and she was basically planning to give her life up at that stage. So it's not just fertility. The reason why fertility is becoming that important is because that is the core concern that we have assigned to women. Even So you and I are from the urban areas. We are but 10 to 15% of the world population, and the rest of it still lives in the rural areas. Even if they do live in the urban areas, their approach and their exposure and their society and their culture is very much still of the idea that the core function of women in society is reproduction. So it's kind of telling that until we remove that approach, the approach of women themselves is not going to change.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, you're right. I mean, and you know, I dare say it's even in the urban places. I mean, there are IVF clinics, I think, in every you know, gully and you know, every little.
Yeah.
So I think that is testament to the fact that how important this is for a vast section of the society, urban as well as rural, and that is so true. So with this, I would like to move on to Rashi. Rashi is you know, she's a criminologist by you know, training and this thing, and she's also the founder of the Alternative Story, one of the more rights-based, queer affirmative, trauma informed providers, you know, service providers of mental health that I have come across, which is very rare, all the three things that I said together. And not only that, Rashi is also an advocate of, you know, rights-based approaches to healthcare. So I know that she runs you know, so many, you know, wonderful sort of, you know, feminist groups and, you know, support groups around PCOS and so much more that I'm sure I'm not even aware of. So thank you so much for joining, Rashi. And you know, in the context of all that we spoke about, I would really like to hear from you about this, precisely the idea of, you know, culture, gender, and mental health. You know, culture is ultimately, I would say, the biggest arbiter when it comes to not just defining mental health. You know, we have always heard of how women with, say, ADHD and things like that, they're just misdiagnosed all the time. And even the idea of healthcare spending, that is so you know, arbitrated by culture itself. So would love to hear from you in this context.
Absolutely. So I think every health concern, right, is packaged up with culture. So for example, if you take and you define a disorder looking at only male presentation of that disorder, you're going to find that female
I think Rashi got disconnected.
Rashi, I think we've, is it just me or is Rashi stuck?
Yeah, I think her screen's frozen.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, no issues. Rashi, I don't know if she can hear me. Okay, I think she'll come back. No issues. She'll come back. We'll patch her back. Meanwhile, I think let's move on to Sinjini because, you know, very related ideas, you know, of the idea of culture. And from you, I would, you know, we would personally request to hear a little more about, you know, mental health for women at the workplace as well. Very related to the idea of, you know, the roles of women, the gendered roles of women. And these days, you know, I have personally started seeing, you know, with the very fluid definitions of professional and the very fluid definition of workplaces. I have stopped saying personal and professional. I say more intellectual and domestic when it comes to, you know, women especially. Oh, hi, Rashi, you're back.
Yes, I'm sorry. I think I just got cut off.
Okay, Sinjini, is it okay if you just...
No, I think let's Sinjini finish and then I'll come back.
Sure? Are you
Yes,
sure?
yes.
All right. So, you know, so since you have actually a little bit more about Sinjini, you know, she has, she's a founder of Lighthouse and she teaches programs reimagining personal growth and leadership, interdisciplinary tools of storytelling and everything. And she's also appointed as the national president of mentoring and soft skills at Women Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries, mentor of change at Niti Aayog, and she's just, you know, overall this really awesome person who every time I meet her, she's doing something new and amazing. So I don't know how to like summarize that. You know, Sinjini, I would love to hear from you about, you know, your personal experience as well, you know, navigating mental health at the workplace and health and the workplace, and how that again, you know, the whole what do you, I mean, like the balancing act, you know, how that throws women off balance so many times. So over to you. Would love to hear your thoughts and experience on this.
Thank you so much, Swarnima, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here. And thank you for that very flattering introduction, and then to ask me about my personal experience with it, because that really explains why every time you meet me, you see me doing something which is a new horizon and a new angle. The reason being, to give you a very, very snapshot background, I studied economics from ISI. I have spent 12 years talking to computer in number language. I'm an actuary by profession, a qualified actuary with, who spent her entire 20 studying and only, excavating and exploring the left side of her brain. I had a professional burnout. I was a step away from quadriplegia back in 2015. So, of course, a month of bed rest, another month of bed rest, unpaid leaves. After a point, the doctor told me that you really need to recoup and recover, and unless you are done, you are just, hanging by the cliff. Around that point, when I finally had I don't know what it takes for me, who has been grown up with the psychology of growing up and doing something. I mean, my identity being defined by my profession, to put in my paper. I thought I'll be back in 6 months. The last day of my corporate career, so to say, HR exit form comes, and they ask me, the reason for exit. Of course, it's all known, it's discussed and everything, but there is this form and there's this column. And I paused there. And after a while, I put in what we put in when we don't find right words. I put in personal. I think over the last 6 years, I have been looking at, and again, to borrow from Pallavi's word, where she said interdisciplinary, our problems are interdisciplinary, our solutions also have to be interdisciplinary. I think I spent the last 6 years to look at this prism called personal, and what all hides inside the word personal when a woman says it. Change of priority, happy change of priority, all happy mom faces, there's so much to dig there. I think, that is what I'm trying to do. First, to gain courage to stand up and speak my truth, and to say personal is political, personal is universal. And the moment you say it, we are like werewolves. Everybody says, me too. And that's exactly where I think, women, mental health, corporate culture, they all play in. The very basic thing about corporate culture and why they need special attention to women mental health is because they need women, because they need perspective. I'm even forgetting the human side of equity and equality. I mean, just the very virtue that they need perspectives, they need fresh perspectives. I mean, why do they need women? And if they need women, women come with brains, and brain is a part of your body. So they need mental health as much as they need physical health. I think that's a no-brainer. What is shocking and missing is that we don't talk about women specific things, because corporate culture is masculine. There is, I don't think it is, in the scope of debate anymore. It's clearly masculine. Be it the colors, be it the visuals, be it the pictures on the wall, be it the cover on the magazine pictures, be it the father who is busy to go to work while the mother is packing tiffin. It's stereotyped, it's prototyped, it's everywhere. It's media to home, to children books, to everywhere. The thing about mental health with women is that men also suffer, men also have a lot of suppression, they cannot cry and stuff like that. That aside, women go through very specific cycles. If they start working at around the age of 23 or 25 or 29 or whatever, as you said, motherhood, and I would also assume, of course, marriage remains a priority. Not every woman has to get married, not every woman has to have child, but it remains a priority. It is forming a huge majority of us. And the obvious things, like nowadays, we of course see much more infertility cases and treatments required than before, given the obvious nature of, how hormones play out and how we try to play the man's game in the man's way to be able to make. And there is this, a whole lot of thing that happens. I'm sure, many of the panelists are much more qualified than me to talk about what happens biologically inside. But outside, what we see is that, the infertility treatments and having to hide that, just the way we had to hide as teenagers the stains on our white skirts. there's so unnecessary shame and guilt and secrecy around things that are not our crosses to carry. There's so much of shame and guilt in saying that my child is unwell, because you cannot take sick leave for your child. So you pretend it's your fever. You cannot call up your boss and say, I've got a menstrual cramp. You say, I've got temperature. Followed by having the child, then bringing up the child to the very unfair emotional labor share and parenting share of the child, PTMs, when you have to steal from the back door almost when the boss is not looking, so that you can attend the child's school play or PTM. You would have definitely done your job and more. But there is this sense of being in the office in certain hours dictated by very masculine terms, because it is possible for men because they have a wife at home taking care of everything else. So I think that's a very stereotype cliche. It's a sorry figure that we are having to talk about it today, sitting in March 2021. Talk about empty nest syndrome, talk about premenopausal, postmenopausal, menopausal, postpartum depression, all these specific things which cause women to be knocked out, and then there is no provision for an easy second career because there's a whole lot of judgment around promotion and hiring, which is gendered. So I don't think mental health conversation can be separated out from the emotional well-being. And by that, what I mean is, we have been talking about diversity inclusion, but that phrase is never complete without the third term, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. For belonging, we need to make men the ally. It is not on us. Men should make themselves the ally in the process. The culture should shift. The colors of the walls on the corporate should shift. The pictures on the magazines should shift. The leave benefits should explicitly mention menstrual leave, mental health leave, children's sick leave. There are so many things that we need to do. Like if there is an office gym, there should be a meditation group. I mean, some of these are gender agnostic, some of these are more women specific, but a whole lot of things to do, and especially for phases of the woman's life cycle, vulnerable new moms. I mean, 9 out of 10 would require a soft, word of empathy. Maybe the leaders should put a time on their keynote at the town halls to say, I've been there, I know what it takes, hang on. At times we are hanging on by the last piece of thread. We need that explicit messaging through our leave policies, through our culture, through our leadership messages. And I think through everything, every day there should be a point to be made on the floor in terms of conversations. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Sinjini. I think this was so important what you said. It's equity, inclusion, and belonging, and I think that goes beyond women. I think that is something that so many people, like even when we talk about the whole binary of man and woman, when it comes, that's also equally oppressive and equally, so many, the POSH Act and the sexual harassment laws, it's all about men and women and blah blah blah. And one can only imagine what how oppressive the binaries as well can be. And I think that is the whole idea. I think when we're thinking of, which is why I said in the beginning that these days especially, it is such a false binary to think in terms of personal and professional. I think it's very much beyond that. It's very much, for instance, now my home has become my professional space as well. And if, which is the case with everyone, but in the domestic space, women, have to be domestic. They can't be professional, and unless they want to be labeled as something or the other. So I think when we talk about fluid spaces, then fluid gender roles and more empathetic gender roles, more inclusive gender roles also has to become the norm in some way. Some of it will have to come from interpersonal conversation, and some will have to be enforced by policy. That's just how it has to be. So now I just want to take a pause here to tell everyone that we will be having a Q&A towards the end a little bit, and after we've heard the opening remarks from everyone, I will also sort of open this up to the questions. So just so that we can focus on listening to the opening remarks of all the speakers right at this moment. So thank you for that. All right, so now moving back to Rashi, who is back, and she had started speaking. So sorry that the internet cut you off. But we
yes.
were talking about gender and culture, and I think if anything, Sinjini has provided more sort of context to that.
Absolutely.
In the space of the workplace and everything. And yeah, please carry on with what you were saying.
So, like I was saying that I feel like, and Shinjini kind of used a beautiful example of the prism, right? I feel like if you put in mental health through a prism and see what it kinds of refracts the lights to, culture would be a very important refraction of that light. What that means is that it has a huge impact on how we see mental health, and you cannot remove culture away. Culture does impact mental health, and mental health in turn does impact culture as well. So what is diagnosed as a disorder, what is looked at as a disorder, what is looked at as what kind of treatment is required, all of that comes from culture. Something as simple as, I think I was having a discussion with friends on talking about how difficult it is for me to wear a seat belt, right? Because seat belts were not designed keeping women in mind. We didn't want, we didn't look at women when we're thinking of their safety. So even similarly, like the example that you gave when you're talking about ADHD was studied completely on male brains. So when ADHD is diagnosed in male children, they're diagnosed as young as 2 or 3, whereas females require to be around 15 or 16 to get diagnosed because the symptoms look differently. And it's not just mental health. It's not something as complex as ADHD as well. Like Sabine said, like we don't understand too much of the brain chemistry. We don't understand too much of the brain as yet. There's so much unknown. But even the things that we've put on so much research on, like cardiovascular diseases, right? We've pumped a lot of money into it. Most of the symptoms women experience are atypical symptoms. If 80% of women are experiencing atypical symptoms of heart disease, how is that typical, right? You have so many women that don't fall into your boxes, then why is it still considered a typical symptom? So culture, how we look at things, what kind of products we create, what money goes into research. Women have been asking from work from home for such a long time, and because it just would make life easier for most of them. But it needed a pandemic for people to realize that telecommuting is very much possible. The moment it was the bottom line that started getting affected, we all scrambled up and said, okay, work from home, because right now we can't allow you to work from offices. It would be wrong. So even men were okay with working from home. And it's just understanding that, and I saw a lot of the questions that came in, right, about taboos about mental health and practice. And I said that we can't remove culture. Tomorrow, if I say that, you will be grounded in culture, you will always be grounded in culture, but you have to course correct. You have to ask those questions. I worked in medical education. I worked for the Maharashtra government to create a gender sensitive medical education curriculum. And it was very useful, but in the end, what came up was, okay, so if I'm going to ask women all these questions, then how much time do I have to spend with them? I don't have that kind of time in a government hospital. I need to finish it really soon. So it is a matter of what culture allows us to do. You can't say it's only about gender. It's also about capitalism. It's also about resources that are allocated to this. Mental health is like 1% of our health budget, and our health budget is 1% of our GDP. So it's like the problem is huge. And then within mental health, we're going to talk about women's mental health, and that's going to be even smaller. So it's not just about what things we allow it to be. It's a complex issue that requires so many stakeholders. Having said that, we have great people who are working on the field, and this panel kind of shows it, that despite having limited resources, we are able to make things happen. And that is because one of the pillars of any kind of support is community support. Community support is this excellent form which can mitigate so many issues. We have very few psychiatrists, very few psychologists, but we have a lot of people and a lot of community, whether that's a religious community, whether it's a cultural community, whether it's your residential welfare association. All of this is so there's so much of it. I think that's brilliant that we can, if we can have a lot of people just talking about mental health, I think we can get there.
Absolutely. And I think you're so right, in the sense that there have been some seminal books on, female health, psychology, and mental health, which are talking about how, the women who were considered mad or, suffering from mental illness, like, way back when, they were just women who were not enjoying or attesting to gendered roles such as doing household chores or being able to bear kids.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've seen that post which says that reasons for admission into an asylum. And one of my favorite thing was reading a book.
Yes.
And I'm like, yes, I need to get into the asylum as soon as possible because I like reading books, right? So again, like time changes, our definition of mental illness changes, our definition of who is mentally ill, who needs what kind of support constantly changes. And even if you look at, like Sabine also mentioned, that violence is such a pervasive issue in all of our lives. I mean, I can say it without even asking for consent, that all of us have been violated at some point in our life in some way or the other. Excuse me. And yet we seem to be functioning absolutely normally, right? So it just goes to say that we are such different people all the time, and yet something connects all of us. And that's what culture does. Culture can connect, and using culture, instead of saying that culture is something that can be bad, we just kind of have to flip it on its head and say that we use this culture for the good while being very cognizant of its bad effects.
Absolutely. That is so powerful, especially in the context of what you said about community mental health. And that's a brilliant starting point for even Snigdha, who is actually working precisely on this, about on peer support, on community mental health. And, one of those, practitioners who I find is so passionate about bridging this gap on tertiary mental health, as she calls it. So Snigdha is a psychotherapist and, mental health educator. She's a founder of the Life Surfers and the Mind Life Project. And she's also the founding member of the Bharatiya Counseling Psychology Association and the co-founder of Let's Talk. She has actively engaged in a passion project of trained mental health peer support in college campuses and workplaces across India. So, Snigdha, from you, I would like to hear two things. One is, of course, the idea of the community health aid, community mental health aid, that, sort of Rashi spoke about, and we'll sort of bounce off, on that. And the second, and more importantly, is also, as a practitioner, what has been your experience in, the way women try to access or don't try to access help around these poorly understood conditions, PMS, PMDD, postpartum depression. Because many a time what happens is, half the time people say that PMDD, what is PMDD? It's a myth. PMS is a myth. Blah blah blah. That's the first barrier to care. People, I genuinely, I'm not making this up. I genuinely come across a lot of people, even in the healthcare profession, who've actually said this to me, that blah blah blah. We won't get into that. And the second is postpartum depression. The reason postpartum depression is so challenging is not only because of the experience, but so few women are able to name it, that, okay, this is, or they're so afraid to name it precisely because of culture, like we've been talking about. So we'd like for you to shed some light on this, getting help for really poorly researched or poorly understood conditions. And then how can community mental health aid, really play a role in navigating these barriers to access? You are on mute. This is the reality of everyone on Zoom.
Sorry.
The first 2 seconds, no problem. Please carry on.
So thank you so much, firstly, to Thea Care and Asian Pathfinders for inviting me. And it has been wonderful hearing all of you. Sinjini and me are part of a WhatsApp group, but I had messaged her a while ago to congratulate her on her in cooperation with at IIM Bangalore. So yeah, thank you. And to answer your
Snigdha, Snigdha, sorry to interrupt you. We lost
Sanjeev?
you. Yeah, we lost you for a few
Okay.
seconds there. After you said you congratulated Sinjini, so congratulations on our behalf.
Okay.
From our end,
Okay.
congratulations on that. After that, we lost you, Snigdha. So if you
Can
could,
you hear me now? Am I
we
clear
can.
now? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can.
Okay.
Please.
So yeah. So taking off and kind of bouncing back forth from what everybody has already said, that we cannot look at gender in isolation. All right. And similarly, when we look at gender mental health and poorly diagnosed issues like let's say postpartum depression or PMDD, the idea is, who is this person who is undergoing the problem? It's a woman, right? Now women healthcare itself is a huge issue. Now bringing that woman to the woman's need for mental health care. If we separate gender or the woman's need of mental health care, let's also separate mental health care. Mental health care itself is so misunderstood. Like Dr. Kapasi rightly said, that when we're looking at mental health, most of us, and how the mental health treatment and the entire care system has evolved, it's a medical model. It is based on symptom and diagnosis, right? So XYZ are the symptoms, therefore this is going to be the diagnosis. Whereas the representation of any mental illness or any mental health problem begins with, how the person is feeling, how the person is behaving, their own understanding of themselves, how they relate within their relationships, their functionalities and dysfunctionalities in everyday life, right? Now, when you look at a woman who is not performing an optimum role within a household, nobody cares that she might have a mental health problem. What they care is कि सुबह time से sorry, I go back to Hindi because I talk a lot in Hindi. So what they care about is that she didn't wake up on time, she didn't make the tiffin, she didn't do this, she didn't do that. Nobody goes back into the backstory of why she's having those problems, why is she unable to sleep, why does she look so irritated, why does she look so angry, why has her self-loathing and self-pity and behavior changed, right? We do not understand those concepts. So to as Purnima said in an opening remarks, that women health is only limited to the reproductive health. Okay. Now, when we look at PMDD, which is a very, very severe form of PMS, it is debilitating. It causes dysfunctionality. It causes depression, anxiety, extreme mood swings, their inability to work, and it is a lifelong thing that you need to manage. Okay. Now, periods is very common, right? PMS is very common. Every other woman is going through it. What is your problem? What is so difficult that you're unable to manage it? What is this anxiety? Oh, this is just, your mood swings, nothing else. You just, you're throwing a tantrum, or you don't know how to manage your PMS and stuff like that, right? So as a woman also, you don't know that there can be more. You don't understand that what you're going through is not PMS. It is more than that. And then you shift again to postpartum depression. Now you're the mother, you're supposed to feel happy, you're supposed to feel so joyous, you brought a life into, you're like, the goddess who's brought life into the world. How can you feel depressed? How can you not love your child? But imagine a woman who is under postpartum depression, who finds it difficult to cuddle a child, and the struggle, her inability to understand that she's going through this pain, that she doesn't understand that what is wrong with me as a mother, that I'm unable to express my love to my child, that I'm teary eyed and I'm in such emotional pain, where I'm supposed to be so joyous and enjoy this motherhood and, you know, be this persona of the, you know, of the typical how people look at a female after giving birth. So it's very difficult for a woman herself to understand what she's going through, because, you know, there are certain roles that are, you know, that you yourself identify with. You don't know that, you know, there can be a problem which is bigger than PMS, that there can be a problem called postpartum depression, which is a little different than you know, your regular depression. And it's okay if you're not feeling that outburst of motherly, you know, super goddess love for your child, and you're feeling extremely low. You know, you might have suicidal thoughts, you're unable to relate to yourself as a role of a mother, you're unable to love yourself, you're unable to love your body, you don't understand what's going on with you. And the third is that even the people around us don't understand. You know, there is such lack of education around mental health per se. And then to bring in the idea of gender mental health specifically to these couple of illnesses which are uncommon, right? Like where, you know, like 30 to 40% of the women, in their during the menstrual age would be going through PMS, out of which only about 8 to 10 or at the max 12% would be diagnosed with PMDD. So it is uncommon, but it is a debilitating condition. You know, just as endometriosis, it takes so long to get even diagnosed. And then comes the role of a practitioner. Now, let's say in our system, you know, in our healthcare system, who do you go to when you first have a problem? You go to, you know, this uncle who's, or this auntie who has been my family doctor and who has been treating me. Oh, this person is a family friend, and we go to them. Now that family friend has no clue. The family friend doctor or a general practitioner or your local gynecologist doesn't understand the representation, okay, or the sensitivity or the compassion to understand the representation of a physical illness and its manifestation as in the mental health form, like a PMD or a postpartum depression. So it's extremely important, and I've often heard from my clients, from my own relatives who come after hunting, from other people, from GPs and everywhere else, that the GPs give them medications and do not send them to a psychiatrist or a psychologist for a proper diagnosis and treatment, right? So you have to understand that it's a lot to do with how we understand mental health generally, to put it in perspective to the gender mental health and specifically to these uncommon illnesses, right? Then comes the idea of community mental health, and which is what, as Vandama said, that my organization and I am, involved in right now, is that you cannot think about people assessing health, especially mental health treatment or care, without educating them, or without looking at peer support as being part and parcel of providing them that holistic care. And when I say peer support, it means the workplaces that they work, that they are working in, the communities, the campuses, the colleges, the immediate peer group that they are involved with. How that peer group is trained to understand that this person might be undergoing a mental health crisis, or is undergoing a mental health concern, or is developing a mental health problem. And yes, that person can come to me because I am the tertiary care provider. I am not a counselor, I am not a therapist. The peer supporter is not a therapist, but yes, I am trained to do that initial conversation where I help you assess that there can be a mental health issue, and yes, that I will assist you in aid you to reach a professional mental health care provider so that you can take that help. And also, in case right now you are not ready to take that help, because you may, for whatever 100 reasons, you may feel that you don't want to go, I am still available as that tertiary care where you come and talk to me, right? So this is the kind of model that can work across cultures, across boundaries, because we are looking to train people from within their own peer group. so that the person doesn't feel isolated, the person doesn't feel misunderstood, they don't feel that, nobody's there to understand what I am going through, right? So that's the basic idea.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Snigdha. I think that was so important, especially from the idea, like, Rashi very rightly said, the barriers to access are too many. And, not all people are willing to sort of, articulate their struggles as mental health issues for which they need to see somebody, and, it's sometimes the things are so situational that if there is, a framework in place and a format in place for community mental health, that really, not only increases healthcare outcomes, it increases happiness outcomes. And thankfully now we have so many, ways of measuring that. So speaking of that, speaking of workplaces, we have one question here for Sinjini, and, since she has to step out quickly, I'll, start with some questions. But before that, I think to all the people who are watching, now is the time when we would love to, get you on for questions. I have some of my own, but, I've been speaking for a while, so we'll be happy to take your questions now. So Sinjini, as somebody has, Atul has, made a very astute observation that, most of the time when we're talking about sexual harassment at the, at the workplace and everything, even though there are laws and regulations in place, the culture again is such that, expects women to just take it lightly or laugh it off and, not get too worked about these things. So in these situations, under this kind of a reality, how can, things like sexual harassment and mental health issues actually be taken seriously when most companies, as he very rightly points out, do POSH only to meet regulatory requirements? And as somebody who's on the ICC of way too many startups, and say, I mean, I know the struggle is real to get any real work done for POSH. So yeah.
Yes, I wish I had an answer to that. Really, that's a brilliant question. And it's a pity that when we talk about any kind of gender-related investment from the corporate, we do POSH for the men, and we do women leadership programs, women networking, etc., for the women. But women are not broken. The system is broken. And men need to be sensitized. It's not just enough to not touch a woman inappropriately. You need to step up. I mean, what are the standards we are setting for the men at workplace? Just not to crack a, sexist joke, or, I mean, that's so bad. And again, that's just the surface. Gaslighting, because I don't even know whether I should just quietly absorb it and let it pass. Whether I should, when everybody, it's a birthday boy and he goes and blows the candle and cuts the cake, one stab and steps back, then it's all the women, all of us girls, who go and slice the cake and put it on dishes. And it has become such a second nature. And I think sexism and patriarchy has become so much integrated in a system that even as a woman, I don't feel, I don't know, I'm always double guessing myself. I really don't have an answer to that, but just to give one more example, more recently, many of you would know Toastmasters. So I am a Toastmaster, I'm a distinguished Toastmaster. I've been in Toastmaster for many years now. So recently I said that, plagiarism has a 25. So if you are, picking up your speech from somewhere else, there's a penalty. So I said sexist jokes in speeches should also get a penalty. And the overwhelming number of responses to that, and majority being women responders, said, or the other option is work on your humor. I'll leave you with that thought. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that, but the fact that we are acknowledging it and discussing it is also one step forward.
No, that's absolutely true. I think, especially after Me Too, one hears a lot of, like I said, I've been part of several ICCs, and the conversation these days is, "Are to hum flirt bhi nahi karenge," those kinds of things. And that really, gives you pause, as people working in the space of gender, it gives you pause that, is it really this, that our culture does not know how to distinguish between harassment and flirting, or, something inappropriate, and, just
words we use, if teasing, Casanova, these are such nice and, fancy words. I mean,
yeah, the Humphrey Bogart masculinity.
Yeah.
No, that's so true.
I just wanted to come in at this point and say that, like, sexual harassment, like Srinjini said very rightly, is just one tip that we can see very obviously because of the laws and the rules that are in place, but obviously sexism is very deeply ingrained. And if anyone is in an ICC at this point, I think, like, I make it a point to push and push and push to do things in the workplace, just create posters or whatever, and just keep talking about impact over intent. And, also the entire wear the badge of the radical feminist very proudly. I think that also comes in. And what happens in the end is that the people in the team might hate you, might think of you as extremely radical, but the women who might be going through something difficult will always then know that you are the safe person. So I think that at that risk of being that person for the men, I'm okay being that person for the women. So it's just a balance that we have to constantly, and it's difficult. It's like you said, it's extremely difficult because it's thankless and it's, like,
Isolating.
yes, extremely.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Also, I think it's also important to see how gender, patriarchy, how our everyday conversations happen around families and around dining tables with our cousins, with our friends, and how, like, I am termed as a killjoy because I catch the sexist jokes and I have remarks around them. So the idea is that, these are all very latent. These are all very, very subconscious, and men and women and across binaries are all patriarchal in certain degrees. There are some who have really broken the shackle and have come out and have understood it and understand how it plays, and then how it plays in healthcare, how it plays in family systems, how it plays at assessing healthcare, accessing healthcare, and taking a step forward to being creators of accessible care platforms, like everybody is doing in their own right. So the idea is to normalize and initiate conversations around our own places, around our own little communities that we live with. And that's if we're able to impact those little communities, bring up our children a certain way, influence our nephews and nieces, open their brains and their eyes and their ears to questioning, that itself becomes a huge reward on an everyday basis, apart from the professional work that we are all doing.
That's so true. Also, I think this is a question that I would like to ask, all of you, and maybe, even, Sabine can also answer that, as somebody who's, really in the space. She's actually looking at, like you rightly pointed out, Sabine, earlier, that, practitioners are also drinking out of the same well as everybody else. I mean, they are biased because we are biased. So many doctors and gynecologists tell us that, they have to make such a lot of effort in, sometimes, just getting the girl who walks into the clinic alone, because, the mothers, or sometimes even the mothers-in-law will, like, accompany them and say, ki, acha, but, pregnancy mein to koi dikkat nahi hogi na, all those kinds of things. So now I want to ask you that, when we talk about, culture, like we speak, a lot of things are not, blatant. They are not out there that, oh, you need to be at home. Nobody says that out loud. Very few people say that out loud these days, that, no, you're a girl, so you will be at home and, make chapatis. But when a woman is going out to work or something like that, there are these implicit things, like there are invisible punishments that are there. There are invisible sort of, threads that are attached, or strings that are attached. And that has got to have, an impact. Similarly, when women are reading about, stories of abuse or gender-based violence, and I was reading this very interesting thing where we said that, we always talk in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, but there is something called pre-traumatic stress disorder, where women are always sort of, anticipating assault and saving themselves. So I wanted to, talk a little bit about, and, both Rashi and Sabine, how do these implicit, invisible punishments and risks of really affecting us? I mean, there is a physical and a mental, there is a physical effect for sure. So how does it, affect our emotional and mental health? Sabine, would you like to go first?
So, yeah, this is a really interesting way of thinking about it, though as Snigdha was mentioning, patriarchy in both men and women is extremely prevalent. In fact, in most households, the traditional Indian household, it's the women who basically propagate patriarchy more than men. So it's the women who basically teach other women to be more submissive, to be in gender roles, to adhere to these gender norms, right? Which is not true for all cultures, but if you look at the Dominican culture, the Mexican culture, pretty much all developing countries have similar connotations, right? And which is the largest amount of the global population. So it's not just the problem for India per se, one. Second, see, as you said, there is always an, sort of checks and balances that once we inherit that patriarchy and once we internalize it, then we put on ourselves, right? Before we go outside, we check whether our cleavage is way too low. We, see if the makeup is taunting, or like even saying that it's taunting is wrong. But that is what any teenage girl would be told over and over again, to check herself, to see, like as you said, making for a married woman to get up earlier than her husband and make tea before he rises, or all of these, or absence of these, have real consequences. Right now, that is true that these do basically create the culture where mental health is ignored, especially when women talk about mental health is extremely ignored. And I think one of the biggest things that it's linked to is also the whole idea of paymastership, right? Men have always been considered as the paymaster, or rather the people who basically are the bread earners in the family. And when until and unless women fight for their equal right of being called the paymaster or being called the bread earner, they will, even though they in some cases earn more than the men, will always designate these roles to themselves, even if it's not the even if it's not the partner who is imposing it, because it's the culture that's imposing it. That is one thing. Second, I think what is very, very important is you have to understand that there is a difference between how chronic mental disease is basically looked at, and how these how basically symptomatic diseases are looked at. So severe mental illness, of course, has a lot of focus in most of these dialogues. But if you look at it, CMD is also as difficult for men as it's for women, because men also in the society are not, are not allowed to accept that they need mental health, that they need care, and that basically deteriorates the entire household atmosphere. It's not just the women who face these problems of being heard. Even men internalize patriarchy, and that results in they not being able to come out with. Now, in the current scenario where a lot of people are losing jobs, if you look at that, a lot of men require those support as well as women, where they require infrastructure which helps them to cope with these changing dynamics. But men are far less eager to seek support, because women have always learned to thrive through women-centric communities, right? At least historically. And that, I think, is one of the brilliant solutions that we have come across. So even when I was studying in the US, a lot of people were able to relate through support groups, right? Support groups which made people understand that they are not alone in what they are facing, because there are as Snigdha very rightly said, there are so many different presentations of mental health. And see, health is something which is not normal for anyone. There is no set normal in a body. Even something as basic as your hemoglobin count or your WBC count is actually not normal, right? A person can have a really low BP and still thrive. Athletes have really low heart rates and thrive, right? Because their bodies change their physiological structure. So when something as measurable, as clinical as that does not have a set number, then how can we in any way feel that clinical diagnosis of healthcare or of mental health disorders can be as easy as we say. So the biggest solution, I think, in this case would be to develop systemic support groups and open people up to sharing their ideas and sharing their experiences through that. I think that's one of the most effective ways for long-term support and long-term management, right? For all genders, for that matter. And I think someone also asked, how can we reduce, biases for healthcare professionals? So I think the only way we can reduce biases so I'll give you a very strange example of myself. So I and my husband went for family counseling, right, to a psychiatrist, a friend of mine who is a psychiatrist. And even though they know who we are, the first suggestion was, "Bacha kar lo, 5 saal ho gaye shaadi ke, that will solve all problems," right? I think this is the most absurd, and this was a psychiatrist telling us that, right? And we going by our own volition to them. So both of us being successful professionals in our own right, and still being given this gives you a very stark understanding that we are a product of our upbringing. We are a product of our culture. That includes your psychiatrist, that includes your therapist. You cannot eliminate that part of biases from them also. It's difficult for them to coming from a culture that promotes these biases. So sometimes medically we explain away these things, but this is, as you say, this is the worst possible advice that you can give to a couple that comes for counseling, right? To have a baby, because you never want a baby in a marriage that needs counseling to begin with, or at least which still needs to go places. So I think those are the kind of problems that we will face until we go from ground up, from not just medical education, from education at home, as Snigdha was saying, that we need to teach our kids to, and show them, rather than that, we have to show them to be less biased, to be less gender oriented, and apart from physical health, to also be concerned about their mental health and not be ashamed about telling that, right? Again, the shame factor is one big problem that we face, and I think that is where the communal support of support groups, of talking to people with similar or same kind of issues, or even listening, just listening to people who are facing similar problems help, because then you know that no, you are not alone, you are not crazy, you are not out of the ordinary, you can get help, and that could, as it has helped others, it probably will help you also. So that sliver of hope and understanding, I think, helps.
That's so true. And there's a very interesting question and very appropriately sort of, like addressed to Rashi, that, we're talking about patriarchy and culture and mental health practitioners, but, the state itself, like they said, not explicitly, but actually I would say very explicitly, sometimes, sides with patriarchy or is patriarchal.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do we, she has asked, they have asked over here that, well, I'm sorry, not she, I don't know. They have asked that, how can we really sort of involve, state players also? But, I would also ask you that, how do we, identify, we know, everyone cannot identify that how the state itself is patriarchal, how a certain kind of toxic masculinity that is state sponsored is also patriarchal. And this is not to do with any government or anything of that. So that is the nature of our state, and I mean, we all know about the head, Harry, Meghan thing that's happening. I mean, it's the nature of the state that is patriarchal. So how do we, first implicate and then involve state players when it comes to sort of dismantling patriarchy in healthcare?
Absolutely. So just a couple of examples to give here, right? One, though this is little to do with mental health, more to do with sexual and reproductive health, but I just feel like all of this is so connected. MP government in the 90s had a scheme where they wanted to encourage people to get married in mass marriages and not spend a lot of money in the weddings. So they decided to give a certain amount of, I don't know what to call it, but starter home kits, like it had bartan, some jewelry and some little things to the married couple. Now what happened is, because the scheme was so popular, people who were already married would pretend that they were not married and come into this mass marriage just to get the free gifts. MP government realized this and said, "Hum kyun karenge?" And they said, "How do we ensure that women or people who are not married are only ones getting married in this mass mandap?" Right? They did that by checking the woman's hymen. They said, let's check the woman's hymen and see if she's married or not. And hence, if her hymen is broken, then she must be married. So let's not do her mass marriage, right? So the state is patriarchal, extremely patriarchal. They believe this to be, and it just happened. Like, that was the solution that they thought of. I mean, I bet it was like a group of old men making this decision. So, yeah, it just, and this went out as a policy. Haryana government has a policy of giving dowry to women who get married. If you are orphan and you have nobody to give dowry, we will give you money, right? And it's considered as a government scheme, and it's considered as a cultural thing that the government is doing good. So it is something, it's very ingrained, the government being patriarchal, because people in power are men and patriarchal men. So until and very rightly said that women can be patriarchal too. But I feel that at some level, just empathy happens. Women can be patriarchal, but they're also patriarchal because there is no other form of society that is available to women as of now that they can embrace. Like, we have become feminist after a lot of privilege that has been available to us, that we are able to push back and say that I will not be patriarchal. So it is very difficult to be anything but patriarchal in this world, and so women will uphold patriarchy. So my solution for anything is have more women in power. Whether it is making decisions at your company, whether it is making decisions at the government, it doesn't matter whether the person is right-wing, left-wing, central, whatever, it doesn't matter. We need more women in power. We need more ministers. For such a long time, the women's reservation bill is still not passed in our government, in our parliament. It's just sitting there, right? It doesn't matter what government comes to power. If there is a record number of women in power, you'll see what happens. We know how New Zealand handled COVID. And of course, I'm not saying that it is because it is a woman. It's obviously also because it's a much smaller country, etc., etc. The results, but when it's handled with empathy, the act is not what they did, or it was more about how it was done post the attack done. The fact that there are more women in the parliament and not just that one figurehead, right? That there are more women in the parliament just makes a whole lot of difference. And for women like me, right, imagine seeing women in power and saying, I want to be this person. I would be more interested in getting into politics. I would be more interested into doing all of these things if I just saw more women, right? So the same thing happens when you're talking about pre-stress trauma, right? I call it more of vicarious trauma. I'm not doing this because of anything else. I'm doing this because I think I'm going to be attacked. And I know that this is a real possibility because of the news that I've read, my friends' stories, etc., etc. And we do experience, women experience extremely high levels of anxiety. Women experience high levels of depression. Because of all of these reasons, we are constantly anxious. We're constantly anxious. When in our homes, we're constantly anxious because of the rules that are set by our parents and we don't follow them. We are constantly anxious whenever we are home because we're also being told constantly that stranger danger. There is control over our sexuality, there's control over our mobility, there's control over everything. And that is the default, is that we are going to have mental health issues. The default is that we are going to be, and obviously our hormones are obviously not kind to us, haven't been kind to us, but also patriarchy comes in there by saying that there is not enough research. If any of these issues, the amount of research that has happened in Viagra, if even 1% had happened to anything related to women, whether it's PMDD, whether it is PMS, whether it is postpartum depression, even if 1% was there, right? Imagine this change that would have been there. I'm reading news today that women are not ready to take the COVID vaccine because there is fear that it will affect their fertility. Yeah. So why has fertility become this big issue for women? Because our entire self-worth depends on the ability to reproduce. Our worth has been, every single time I have held a child in my hand, some auntie or uncle will come to me and say, Beta, when are you procreating? Every time I have cared for somebody, in the house, Or, when my brother falls down, they'll be say, oh, you'll make such a good mother. If my entire self-worth is dependent on what kind of a mother I'll make, and then suddenly you're telling me that that is threatened, obviously I'm going to not. And then we make what people think of as irrational decisions, right? I feel it's a very rational decision if my entire self-worth has been determined by society as within my vagina. I'm going to think that my honor and my worth lies in my vagina, and yet there is no research. So
Absolutely.
so it is, I feel like there's so much complexity involved in this. It is, we want each person who has any stake to play to be able to deal with this issue in a systematic way. And the good thing about this is, in every stakeholder there is so much that there is to do that nobody can say कि मेरे को पता नहीं था कि क्या करना है. You can always come to any of the people in the panel or any woman that you know and say, what can I do? We'll give you 10 things to do. So please, and we'll do it for free also.
On that note, and also being mindful of time, Rashi,
Yes.
that was absolutely, so true. I think what we really want to do now is, we've got like last 5 or 6 minutes, and this is not just for the speakers. Of course, I'll be going to the speakers, but this is also for, the audiences to write down in the chat that, when we think of solutions, today what we did was, we touched upon the various pillars, when we come about gender and mental health. These are the various pillars. There is like millions of things to deep dive in each of these. It's like so dense. And I mean, with each of these people, I can like go on talking for like hours or something. And what we really want to do now is go around and really think about solutions, one action item. And by action item, no, we need to change mindset. No, that's not an action item. An action item is that I am going to talk to, like I have a female health startup and I know X number of gynecologists. I'm going to go and talk to them that how can they in practice, integrate a mental health framework, when women are coming in with any issue. Even if it is like, for instance, menopause is not a health condition, but it becomes a health condition because they don't have adequate support. Menopause is like a part of life, unlike, like other illnesses and all. So I'm going to talk to 10 gynecologists and work with them to come up with a mental health framework that is, that will precisely address these things. So we are looking for very specific action items. I first want to start with Snigdha and then go around. And it is a request to all the audiences to also just think of one action item. And we would love to, Pallavi and Shreyas have already been very kind and they have said that they will compile it into something and, we'll share it with you. And because this is important, we have to take away and, perform an action after this conversation. So Snigdha, why don't you go first in the interest of time very fast? The one action item, very specific, to sort of combat all the millions of problems we came up with.
I think for me the one-stop solution is the trained peer mental health support that incorporates a lot of things and a lot of communities, irrespective of gender and the kind of work and the profession they are in, to form the tertiary mental health care system, which I think is needed right now to form the tertiary care and the mental health support and the mental health education. So it incorporates all three in one.
Yeah. All right. So community mental health and setting up frameworks, which you're already doing, and you will, of course, be scaling it. Definitely great.
Yes.
What about, Dr. Sabeen?
So as I mentioned, one thing that I saw really worked even during my practice was creating support groups where we can actually curate members and understand that these people are all in all suffering from similar kind of problems, right? So in my patients, we used to curate these kind of support groups and they used to be part of the care package where we used to make sure that when they pay for our fees, they also attend some of these support groups, at least a minimal of say 10 visits to these support groups before they come for the next round of consultation. And that really changed their perspective. They came up with more informed questions. They came up with much more understanding of their own agency in that matter. So I think that is something that we can start with. It's a very simple intervention even for doctors and really help the patient's perspective, I believe.
Wonderful. Rashi, coming back to you.
So,
We will be compiling all of this and, like add some more to it and then, circulate, Rashi.
So there is a plan for a course that the Alternative Story is planning to start on basics in counseling that is meant for lay people, and I want to see how we can kind of include more spaces that are in the cost that are low cost for women, so that we can kind of create more support structures for women from women, as in so that would be a great, I think, thing that we can put out there.
Wonderful. So we've got community mental health. Yeah, Sabine, go on.
That Rashi, I think one thing that I find is that in these support groups or support structures that we build, why just by women for women, right? Of course, it seems really good, but I believe it should be open to all genders, because that is a beginning of trying to understand each other's problems, right? At least I feel that it has worked really well in my practice in the past, when the leader may be anyone, a man or a woman or anyone else, but inclusiveness of all different genders and their problems actually opens up people to understand, because a lot of these support groups follow a format of anonymity. So you are not looking at someone from a casteist perspective or a classist perspective. You're looking at a very mix of all of these issues. And that really opens up a lot of communication lines, I suppose. I think.
So one was to have more seats available to kind of make the conversation better and keep it available for women. But when it just comes to spaces as well, I do believe that if you want a truly inclusive space, there needs to be carved out a specific space for particular communities. Like having a general community is always good, ideally, but given the realities of things today, there's always a better thing to have a specific space for queer people, for women, just to kind of make that space safe and provide that level of comfort. And obviously the final goal is to have everybody be comfortable in the end in the big group, but sometimes we just need to take that extra step, I feel, to make sure that marginalized folk get some space to speak for themselves and not be hijacked all the time.
Yeah, I think I see what you mean. I mean, like, that is so true. I mean, in the sense that, this is something that I have personally seen in our work as well. That when we started, we were like, men will also come and everything. And it was, for the most part, it was going great. But, it was something like when we created an exclusive space, I don't know about better or worse, but the conversations were different. There were some things that were said in exclusive spaces which were not said in mixed gender spaces. And it is not, I mean, like, better worse, we don't know, or it's just that it's just that a lot many times, like, marginalized communities are discovering their voice for the first time in exclusive spaces. It is unfortunately the reality of, because I think women perhaps have not had the equivalent of the locker room in that sense, you know what I mean? So, the language of female solidarity and everything is sort of like just evolving. But yes, I mean, I think the point of all this is to eventually arrive at a place sooner than later where, like Rashi said, having a mixed gender space does not automatically become, does not automatically equal that, one is hijacking the other. That is sort of, and even now I know there are some wonderful, mixed gender support groups talking about postpartum depression, etc., where there are strict guidelines of, how different people talk and how different people, don't speak on each other's toes, that it becomes a wonderfully moderated space. So with that, in the interest of time, from my end, I would like to conclude this discussion. I have made a note of all the action items that the experts have put in, the speakers have put in, put in place. And I would love if Pallavi and Shreyas are okay with it to also, build on this and come up with a 5-step or 10-step, concrete action item which each of us can do. Or each one, if you're interested in community mental health, then, contact Snigdha. If you're interested in, so many of you have spoken about, sensitizing, medical students. get Sabine as your speaker or trainer or something, and like talk to, get them to talk to these medical students who are very eager these days. So these are some action items that we will be suggesting, and each of us can take an initiative. We don't have to be doing this as a job. We can all be doing this, outside of our domestic and professional spaces, just for the interest of mental health and gender and things like that. And with that, I would just like to thank all of you for sticking around and for asking some very, very important questions. I couldn't even come to my set of questions. Which is okay. I'm always talking to them. So thank you so much for that. And Pallavi and Shreyas, thank you once again for having me and for, this collaboration, for bringing together this conversation and for allowing me to also go on with an action item list or something. So thank you so much for that. Over to the both of you.
Thank you so much, Swarnima, and I would like to thank all our speakers on behalf of Asian Pathfinders. And I would like to say, like, what I have understood, that obviously everybody knows that gender is a social construct, and there is no need to impose that on an individual, that you should follow this norm or you should follow that particular norm because of the culture and etc. And once we understand that, I think we will come out of this biases and everything. And that's what I have learned from this particular session. And I'm sure everybody knows that everybody understood this aspect out of this I can conclude from this discussion. So I would like to thank everyone, and thank you so much. And I would like to ask, request everybody to join our next session on a fireside chat on coming Saturday about, because the basics starts from the rural areas where panchayat is the basic, I would say not a social construct, but it is a political construct, which which comes from that everything here in the rural areas where I'm right now in my village, and I can see how it is developing here about the gender issues and etc. So please join us for coming Saturday at 11 o'clock, and thank you so much, everyone. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.